A SharePoint content architect with a strong focus on content experience, business strategy and alignment, information architecture, and business process improvement, our next speaker has spent the past 10 years designing SharePoint solutions and leading deployments. Speaking today about the SharePoint maturity model, which she created 2 years ago, please welcome Sadalit Van Buren.
Again, welcome everyone. Thanks for coming. So I'm going to be talking today about the SharePoint maturity model. Anyone familiar already with the model? Yes, a couple of people in the audience. Yay. Okay, so I'll get right into it. So I'll talk about, sort of what's in it for you. Why are we here? What's worth learning about in terms of familiarizing yourselves with the model. I'll give an overview of what it is and how it was developed. I'll go into a specific case study for collaboration, because that's the theme of today. And then we'll just close out. So what I usually tell people about what's good to know about the SharePoint maturity model, why it's good for you to understand what it is and to also use it. From an individual perspective, it helps you get a holistic view of your implementation, right? There's tons and tons of great material out there in the community, from Microsoft, from vendors, about all the different aspects and capabilities of the platform. But there was no one particular single resource that looked at them all as a whole, right? All the different pieces of that pie and how they fit together and how your organization might be using them or leveraging them. So that's kind of how this came to be. So that's one benefit. If you go through the model and you actually do an assessment and sort of get your numbers, you can then show improvement if you go year after year and reassess. So I think it's helpful from that perspective, and that's something that then you can take to your boss and say, look, we actually improved last year because we did this and this. So that's a good thing from an individual level. For the organization, right, it'll help you build your strategic roadmap. So you can decide, okay, we're really not where we want to be here, and where do we want to invest? And if you do that and you build your roadmap and you invest and you figure out what competencies you want to improve, it's going to eventually result in a more trustworthy SharePoint environment, happier users, less putting out of fires, for people like yourselves who work with it every day. And then from a global perspective, again, the assessment data that I collect, we've been looking at some of it today. It's helping to answer questions for people just like you in the community, right? So what the data that I gather is, for any of the competencies, what people's maturity numbers are. And then what industry, size of the company by number of employees, budget, things like that. So what I want to answer are the questions like, okay, for my industry, for my company size, where are people typically in their maturity, right? For this number of users, where do people find themselves? For this IT budget, or for this many IT resources supporting the implementation, where are people typically in the maturity? And that can also help make the case for more resources, more budget, things like that. I want to eventually be able to show that there's some correlation between, the way the implementation is supported and the maturity level that it has. So just to tell you a little bit about me, anybody want to take a guess at what these numbers are? And no, I don't have 10 kids. 10 years of experience, somebody's saying. 10 years working with SharePoint specifically. 62? That's how many implementations and projects I've done. End to end. So all different kinds, all different sizes, some very focused, some entire implementation, but that's how many projects. And that's basically what sort of generated this model, and I'll go into that in a second. And then finally, 6. Good guess. Someone said versions of the model. That's a great guess. There's really only been sort of 2 official versions at this point. I've been consulting for 6 years. So that experience has allowed me to see many, many different organizations and many, many different implementations and lots of different ways that people are structuring both their support and their farm. So it's given me a lot of context over the platform. We'll just put that up there for you to see that. That's my company. We're headquartered in the Boston area. We have offices in Chicago and New York as well. We do consulting over a number of areas, not just SharePoint, right? We do data platforms and analytics, user experience, those sorts of things. The main reason I put this in front of you, even though you folks here in DC are not really in our market area, we are hoping that after November 7th, you're going to be seeing this name a lot more. So I'll just leave you with that. It's our hope. Okay, to talk a little bit about sort of my early experience with SharePoint and how I got here and how the model got here. So when I was starting out with SharePoint, I was working at a big law firm in Boston, and they wanted to replace their homegrown intranet with a portal solution. We evaluated a couple different ones. We were looking at SharePoint. That was the beta 2003 version at the time. So this is what SharePoint looked like to me and to us on the app team, right? It was like a beautiful open country, full of potential, really rough, right? Like we were going to have to pave our own way and make it all ourselves, but it was all there. It was beautiful. And I think this is what, this is to a lot of the developers and people, IT folks out there, this is what SharePoint looks like. Now this is what Microsoft tells you SharePoint looks like, okay? It's all there. You just light it up. Just turn on the lights, and it's all ready to go. So you'll be fine, right? Doesn't take any, it's all ready for you to just light up. So when people find out, and again, this thinking over the experience I've had with different companies, when people start using the product and they find out that this is not what it is, this is how they start to think about the product, maybe. Okay? We've made all this investment. It still doesn't do what we want it to do. We've gone down a wrong road, maybe, and now we have to completely rebuild or tear out a piece of what we've done and do it all over again, whatever it might be. So this is the story that I was seeing over and over and over and over again. It happened at that law firm that I'm talking about. We went down this road, and then when I get into consulting, I was seeing it over and over again. So many companies going through this, and they were all thinking that they were on their own little experience, and nobody else had their problems, but really, it looks like this, right? Everyone's going through the process in sort of the same way, and in roughly the same kind of time frame. So it was this high-level view that I was getting from consulting that led me to develop the model. So super high level, I basically took the Microsoft pie that we all know and love, and I broke it out a little bit more, right? So there's 4 core competencies. That's publication, collaboration, business process, and search, right? I consider those the sort of core competencies of SharePoint that people, not only do they start with, but they're really what kind of is the foundation. The advanced competencies, people and communities, composites and applications, integration and insight, those I put in the core category because they usually are a lot more resource intensive, right? They cost more, they take longer, they're harder to do. People will typically put them off a little bit when they're getting started with SharePoint. And then finally, the ones that Microsoft up until recently hasn't really been talking about that much, but the readiness competencies, right? How you handle your infrastructure, how you handle your staffing and training, and how you handle any customizations if you're making those in the system also. Now, I've had some feedback that there's no governance on here, so I'm going to address that, right? Governance I don't see as a specific sort of readiness feature on its own. We'll see when we go through the maturity levels. I figure for whatever you're doing with SharePoint, in order to have a really mature solution of what it is, governance has to be built in. So that's why I don't say it's a competency on its own. It's not something that you can just turn on and say, we have governance now, like you would say, okay, now we have an infrastructure. It's sort of baked into all the different levels. So it goes laterally rather than in a silo. Couple of disclaimers. So I developed 2 years ago, based loosely on the capability maturity model and that SharePoint pie. It starts at 100. So there's no 0 for anyone if you're going through the assessment. Really intended to be a framework rather than a formula, right? So it's not prescriptive. It doesn't say what you should be doing or what you should take as a next step. It basically just says, here's your framework and here's where you're likely to be if you meet these criteria. It doesn't address public-facing websites, any of the cloud versions. I don't hit on any compliance or regulatory issues because those are really so specific to industry and organization, right? So I don't really have a model that says, okay, for regulatory, you should be here. And visual design and branding. So we'll look at a couple of case studies. There are a couple of branded examples there, but I don't consider that a must-have in order to have a mature implementation. I've seen some really beautiful mature ones that are completely SharePoint-y, bare bones. And then finally, just for you to know, it's been, the model over the 2 years, it's been vetted by hundreds and hundreds of community members all over the world. So I've gotten feedback from South Africa and from Trinidad and Tobago and all kinds of other places. MVPs have weighed in, vendors, consultants, end users. Mark, who you saw before, was a really early supporter of it and kind of got it out there in front of people. So I got a lot of feedback. For some of the companies, I've even worked with some of the experts in the industry to build them out and make them what they are. So, I developed it, but it's really been a sort of a real collaborative effort. Any questions so far? Okay. So to go through the maturity levels, right? It's sort of your standard 5 levels, very similar, like I said, to the capability maturity. So for the 100 level, it's really the starting point of SharePoint, right? You're just, for whatever competency it is, you're just getting started. Let's see what this can do for me. Can this solve my business needs? Let's play around and try it out. For the 200 level, you now have maybe a central group, often IT, managing SharePoint or the particular competency, but it's really not widespread throughout the organization yet. You might just be using it for one particular use case. At the 300 level, you've now defined it a lot better, and it's in use across the entire organization. This is the part where it gets to be kind of mission critical, right? So at this point, you're putting governance in place, but it may not be widely understood or followed yet. But you have something, you have a plan, you've got something written, people know in IT at least what's going on, but the whole organization might not yet. And you're also thinking about ROI at this point. So here, we're just seeing what it can do, and here it's like, okay, we know what it can do, and this is the value that it can bring to us if we continue to invest. At the 400 level, now we're really standardizing what we're doing, so it's not only centrally supported, but it's really standard throughout the organization. And at this point too, we're actually understanding and following the governance plan that's in place. And then finally, at the optimizing level, we're putting continuous improvement, right? Everything's just sort of singing along, and we're making continuous improvement based on feedback, on needs, on future versions. We have sort of a plan in place to address that. And we can actually demonstrate ROI at this point as well. So we're looking at metrics, and we're seeing what's happening, and we're able to demonstrate that. Again, just sort of a very loose framework. Just to point out, I think this is probably self-explanatory, but it can really vary within an organization, right? So your maturity across the competencies can vary widely, and even among functional areas or departments, it's going to vary. You might have one department that's really, going crazy with business process, and they're using workflows really well, but the other departments may not be yet. Completely typical. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Certain departments may have different needs. You might have legacy systems that you've got to still support, so you can't get to the next level for whatever reason. There's a lot of different reasons why this can happen, but I just want to point out as we go through this, there can be a lot of variance. So as you're thinking about your own organizations, you're probably going to be able to think of places where, over here the level's here, and over here it's down here. And if you decide to do the assessment, you just have to kind of average down to what what your gut says the organization is. Now, not expecting you guys to read this, but just want to let it sort of wash over you. This is what the core concepts model looks like, right? So for every level, there's sort of some criteria that go along with that. And this is what, this is just that piece of the framework, and this is just what it looks like full up. And there's actually, I've got a website where you can download all this information, so it's out there. I'll give you the link at the end. To point out, too, as you're moving upward through the levels, this red line indicates where, I feel customizations typically need to occur. So by customizations, I mean anything that touches the server or really fundamentally changes the implementation that would affect future upgrades or patches or things like that. So anything that you can do through the user interface, you can get pretty far. But if you really want to get to a more mature level, often you actually have to customize, either by bolting on a third-party product or actually customizing the product yourselves or through a vendor in order to be able to get to the top level. And you can see it really varies widely depending on the competency. So the collaboration one, this is the slice that we're going to be looking at today. And just to show you also, so the other two, these are the advanced and their framework, and then the readiness and their framework. And again, like I said, all this is available online, free for download. It's a tool for the community. So taking today's theme, that collaboration is the key to your success, we're going to look at the collaboration competency specifically. So again, I just want you all to know, there's 10 more of these, and we're going to do a deep dive on collaboration because of the short time frame today. But usually when I do a talk like this, I'll go a lot longer, and I'll go into each one. In fact, I'll be at the SharePoint Symposium later today, and I'll do a much fuller view into this. But we'll just do the one for this point. So by collaboration in SharePoint, I mean individuals working together sort of in a many-to-many way, right, jointly to accomplish a task or get a project done. And so the things we're thinking about from a SharePoint perspective are, do you have a site where people are working? Is there a custom template based on the kind of work that's being done? how are the sites provisioned and deprovisioned? Are you just using, is it basically document-focused collaboration, or are you breaking out of that and going into more of the extended capabilities of SharePoint, right? Are you using lists and libraries and tasks and features like that? So that's how I essentially define it. So at the 100 level, you're just doing basic out-of-box collaboration, right? That default team site that gets created when you spin up a new site. That's what you're using. You haven't made any customizations. There's no process for requesting this new site, right? If somebody needs it, either they have the power to do it themselves, or they can pick up the phone and call IT and somebody will spin that up for them. But there's no process for creating those. Moving up to the 200 level, you've got some way for people to request a new site if they're not able to create it themselves. Doesn't matter what that way is. You've just got some mechanism. Either it's an email address or a link or a form, something that they can fill out and request a new collaboration site if they need it. And at this point, too, we're just very document-centric. But you might be starting to get that sort of holy grail of like, oh, I can email a link rather than an attachment, right? We've all been hearing that sort of SharePoint holy grail for 10 years now, and we know that we're supposed to email the link and not the attachment. So that's where, if you're at that level, if you're getting that, then you're about 200. Moving up to that 300 level, now we're starting to use the other features of SharePoint to get our work done, right? And again, it doesn't matter what it is, but you're just sort of breaking out of that document-centric view, and you're saying, okay, how else can this platform support what I'm trying to do? And I can show some of that in the screenshots and the case studies that are coming. And at this point, too, you might also be developing specific templates for your needs, right? Either specific list templates or document library or site templates, whatever it might be. You're starting to customize and say, okay, we do this the same way all the time, so let's actually change that for our needs. And at this point, again, you see that red line. Over this, you may have to think about customizing if you actually want to move on to the next level of collaboration. So here, at the 400 level, the whole company is using or can leverage whatever tools you have in place. Maybe you have a way of capturing and leveraging email, right? And maybe it's just having the ability to email into document lists and libraries. But whatever it might be, you're saying, okay, we recognize that work is happening in email and it's getting lost if we don't capture it somehow. So we just have a plan in place for how we're going to take that into our collaboration efforts. There's also a notion of taking all that great work that's going on down in the collaboration space and saying, okay, these are some really exemplary pieces of work, and we're going to be able to promote that up and use that in sort of a knowledge base in some way for other people to leverage, right? So I think about companies with a proposal process or contracts or whatever it might be. There's going to be some really stellar examples that you want other people to use. So at this point, you have a way to manage that, right? To take all that work in progress and promote it. And then finally, too, at the 400 level, and this is true sort of across all the competencies in the model, you're thinking about mobile access at this point. Now, I'm hoping that in future versions of this, that the mobile access will be considered much more early. But right now, based on what I'm seeing and what a lot of the validation I've been getting on this model, people really aren't considering it until quite a lot further along in their process. And then finally, at the 500 level, we're collaborating outside the firewall, right? So we've got an extranet if we need that. So we might be able to collaborate with external partners, vendors, customers, whatever it might be. We've got that collaboration capability set up. And some process, too, for not only for provisioning, but for deprovisioning, right? So we've got all these collab sites, and are they just sort of proliferating, and there's this gigantic amount of sprawl? Or do we have a plan in place to take care of those and decommission those as time goes by? And I'll point out, too, in terms of the extranets, I've definitely worked with some clients who want to start there, right? That's the core low-hanging fruit that they want to kind of start with. But I feel like just because you might have extranet sites, it doesn't mean that you're necessarily at that level. I see it as sort of cumulative, right? Like you sort of have to be doing all the other stuff internally in order to be able to say, okay, we're really like nailing collaboration in our enterprise. So the key things to remember at the basic level, you're just doing sort of a very team-centric doc storage kind of model with your collaboration. Moving up, you're going across the enterprise, more people can do it, and there's much fuller functionality. And then finally, at the very top level, you're able to collaborate outside that firewall. Any questions so far? Okay. So this is some of the data that I've received. So I've got I do assessments in person. I have a team that can go out and do them, and I also have an online tool, which I'll tell you a little bit more about it at the end, where you can go and just sort of do a self-assessment for free. So there's about 300 results in there now, which, it's still small, but I'm hoping that, over the months it will grow. This is where people are with their collaboration for the number of years of use, right? So for 10-year users of SharePoint, that's about where folks are, all the way up to just only one or less or one or fewer years of SharePoint. I put the number of responses at the top in white. I don't know if that's readable, but you can see down at the greater number of years, I have much fewer responses, right? I think most people who are sort of jumping on this or have started using the product more recently, there's just a greater number. So that might account for sort of the spike. But you can see the key message here, really pretty low maturity overall based on even 7, 10 years of using the product. So I think the good news is there's a lot more potential and there's a lot more that folks can do to kind of really maximize what they're doing with the product. Yes?
Just for some context, I assume that you found collaboration is one of the higher averages across all the other competencies as well.
It is actually. There are yeah. I mean, obviously the like advanced ones, they're quite a bit lower again because resource intensive, right? So publication, collaboration, they're pretty good. Business process and workflow is higher to the extent that it can be said to be high. Search is rather shockingly low. But yes, it's an excellent point. Collaboration, people are there's this sort of basic need and people know how to do it, so they're getting it done. I just sliced and diced the data a few different ways for you just so you could get a sense. I broke it out by number of employees. So you can see that even with the really, really large organizations or with the small, what you might consider to be more agile ones, people still are, there's not like a definable trend in how they're using the platform, right? The maturity is still kind of roughly the same across, across organization size. I looked by annual budget as well. And you can see here too, again, with very few of the like over $1 million implementations, weighing in, but there's still no real discernible trend. People are sort of at this level regardless of what their budget is. So to just give a few case studies, this is a basic 100 level project site. So most of the, when I go through the whole model, most of the 100 levels are things I built myself because nobody likes to see their site up there as, the like lowest level of maturity. So I built this one as an example. So we're looking at a project site, you've got this sort of, they've just taken a folder structure and used that for the documents. They've had to do the like hinky numbering of the folders so that they'd go in the right order. Maybe a little bit of use of a task list, but really not too much action there. Nothing particular done with the site. We're just using that basic team site template. And really just not much going on over in the navigation here either. Very basic, plain Jane project site. Coming up to a 200 level example, this is just going to more the notion of having a request process in place. So this is actually the project site that we use at my company. We've got sort of our project dashboard. I don't, there's a way to link to my projects. It'll have them show here. I don't use that because I use bookmarks, but it's there and available for people if they want. And there's this button for Create New Project Site. So when people click that, it's not an amazing, beautiful form. It's basically just, tell me what you want the URL to be, which practice area, and which region. That's it. And then we go save. But what that does is that it sort of tags the site in a particular way, and it puts it in that project directory. Something that's just not there out of box with SharePoint. And they actually took out of the earlier version for 2010, right? There's just no way to like nicely tag and have that site directory out of box anymore. So this or something like it would kind of get you up to the next level, right? Just a way for people to create and request new sites and have them kind of exposed with the directory. Moving up to a 300 level, this is a higher education client that I had, and this is their IT department. And I just think it's a great example. These guys were super busy, and they were putting out fires all the time, and they didn't do too much with the product, but they really, really used their collab site, right? They had their out-of-office calendar, like really, really fully built out and used. They used SharePoint for their change management, right? So if they had upcoming changes, they would just put them here for everyone to know about. And then sort of down below the fold, they had their documents, and their major critical sort of how-tos and administration guides and things like that. So again, it's not, revolutionary, but they broke out of that sort of document-centric collab, and they just used the other capabilities of SharePoint in order to be able to get their work done. Going to the 500 level, I don't really have a good 400 level example, but the 500 level, this is a, are people familiar with the Microsoft Technology Centers, those envisioning centers they have? Okay, so they have Microsoft does this whole envisioning center. They have a bunch of them around the country. And basically they take, their big key clients, they'll take them in there and sort of go through a whole day in the life of like what their Microsoft stack could look like if they really optimized it. And this is their example of the SharePoint 2010 extranet, right? It's sort of a model extranet that they built and designed, right? So you can see, there's sort of, it's a partner extranet so that you can see your order information. You've got that nice dashboard right there. There's contact information. So it's just a nice example of an extranet site. It is really hard to find, extranet sites that are built out to this extent, and also that people will actually share, right? So whenever we're talking about intranets and extranets and things like that, if we're talking about live production models, people don't always want to sort of open those up to the community. So it's been a little tough for me to get great examples of this, but this is a nice, at least a nice model of, sort of what could be. So, having talked about maturity, the biggest question I usually get is, why aren't people further along, right? Like if you're sitting there thinking about your own number in your head for collaboration, like that's a big question I get. Why aren't people, if we look at that data, why are people not at a higher level? So we'll talk a little bit about roadblocks. So we're all familiar with I saw that there were a lot of PMs in here today. So we're all familiar with that iron triangle, right? Like we understand. And I'm going to say, I'm not going to talk about this today because I know that you don't have any money, any people, or any time, right? Like, I get it. So we're just going to take this off the table. The real roadblocks that I see to collaboration, beyond all that, the first one is habit, right? People are going to do what they're going to do. And if they're used to collaborating in email or in Excel or whatever it might be, or they've got some sort of site that they've been using before, they're going to want to keep doing that. So, to get around that, usually I recommend you have to show them what's in it for them if they come to SharePoint, right? What would make it better, the collaboration experience? And also maybe put some incentives or disincentives in place. I will just say, we even struggled with this in my own company, right? We've got the SharePoint practice, and we have beautiful project sites, and they're all on there, and all the documentation is there, and we love them and live by them. And some of the other groups, like the pure app dev group or the UX folks, they hate SharePoint. It doesn't feel good, it doesn't look good, it doesn't connect to TFS, so why would I ever use that? So it's kind of like, if you really want to get people in there, you have to kind of provide incentive and disincentive for them to use the system. The other roadblock that I typically see, people going around the system, right? Like it's too hard to get a new site provisioned, or it's too cumbersome, or whatever it might be, or I can't share with external people. I see this at research institutions a lot, right? They've got their internal group, but the most work they do is with external folks. And they can't do that in SharePoint if they're not set up to be, extranet capable. So they'll go around, they'll use Google Docs or Dropbox or whatever it might be, and now you've got all that great work that is just sitting outside your system, and it's a bummer. So what I usually recommend, it's easier said than done, but have some sort of plan for externally authenticating people, right? So that people don't need to go around it. And make a plan to get sites provisioned. That's the main one. Like if you give them an easy, I see a question in the back. Yes?
I work for a government agency. We have an external facing site that I'm standing up now. But it's for external people to talk to the scientists. They don't have accounts on our environment, so I have to create local accounts on the server. But I was told that I cannot create local accounts on the server. How do you get around that?
Well, there's a couple of ways, right? So, may not work for your particular organization because of the policies in place, but there are ways that, you could change your authentication method and actually allow, you could do sort of like an open ID kind of thing where if the users already had, certain types of accounts, like a Windows Live ID, for example, that they could authenticate that way. So you do have options, but it really depends on the policy that you have in place. So there are ways to get around it. You don't have to create an account for everybody that wants to come in, but your organization has to allow you to use some other authentication method for that extranet that's gonna let them do that. So we can talk, I'm not like an authentication guru, but we can talk after about what your options might be there. Okay, the final one that I see that I think people don't talk about too much is there's sort of an economic reality to getting people to come onto SharePoint and adopt and put their work there, right? So especially with the past couple of years, what we've seen are, people have the sense of like they could get laid off maybe at any moment. They don't know, are their colleagues going to be there the next day? Am I going to be there the next? Like a merger or acquisition can happen. There's just so much change. and turnaround in the workforce that, I think probably secretly, if I had some really good work, I'd want to keep that for myself, right? Especially if I felt like I would be out the door tomorrow for whatever reason. I wouldn't want to just nicely share all that and make it good for everybody else. I'd want to keep my work with me. So I think, the sort of subtle thing to emphasize here is let people know that they can get their stuff back off the system as easily as they can get it on, right? So to have some training in place that says, look, you can take all your documents from your sites in a batch and bring them on down here, whatever it might be. Just sort of subtly acknowledge to yourselves that people might be afraid to share because they don't know what's going to happen with their stuff. They have that this is my stuff and I want to keep it feeling. So show them why it's in their best interest and make it easy for them to say, okay, I can get it anytime I want to, and it's going to be okay. Any other questions? Yes?
Actually, I would want to add to the roadblock is some of the organizations don't have Outlook. That's one of the things. I mean, clients which enable collaboration, rich clients which enable collaboration. Do you think you have seen that as more as a roadblock?
Clients that don't have Outlook?
Yeah.
Well, then they're going to have some sort of email system, I presume.
The rich client for SharePoint for collaboration, offline client.
Right, I see what you're saying, the offline sync and right, yes. I mean, I agree with you, that definitely could be a roadblock. Most of the folks I work with are pretty invested in the Microsoft stack, so I don't typically see people where they're using a completely different system. More often what I see is they're not using Active Directory, but they're using some other, proprietary, system that makes it hard to use my sites and, things like that. But I don't often see no Outlook, but you're right. If you didn't have Outlook, it would definitely be a barrier. There'd just be no way. And, I think cross-platform too, like Mac users, right? There's no way to use Workspace, which I use all the time and I think is a really nice tool. So yeah, the platform issues, for sure. That's a good one to add. Okay, so I don't have a sense of what, okay, woo, okay. So, my usual sort of just way of closing out is to say, if you're struggling with maturity or struggling with some of those roadblocks, start small, right? Going back to sort of that, SharePoint's this beautiful country metaphor, you can't build a skyscraper in a day. So if you're struggling with issues, do prototypes and, kind of crappy first drafts, and just to get something out there and to start working with the system. What I had mentioned before, there's an online tool it's either SharePointMaturity.com or SPMaturity.com, both will work. It is a free tool. You do not need to register. It does not require a login, and it does not require any contact information because I specifically wanted it to be available for people in the community to go out and feel like they were not going to be sold or marketed to just to go take an assessment. So basically what you do is if you can go there, there's a link. It's a Silverlight application. You walk through basically the screens that I just for collaboration that we just walked through. There's 10 more for the other competencies. You can get your number, and at the end, it will give you this report of where you are compared to all the organizations that have taken the assessment. Again, completely free and no strings attached. It's not a marketing tool. I really just want to, make a tool available for people and to get more data into the system. And if you decide to go and take it, certainly I will, if you decide to put some contact information, I don't ever share that. Really what you see is the data that I just shared today, industry, budget size, things like that, but I never share company names or personal information. So, again, I know we're sort of down here in DC. I've got a SharePoint Speak Out coming up in Boston, Mass. At the end of this month, and then I will be at the SharePoint conference in November. So if folks are going to be there, I will see you there. And that's my contact information. So thanks again.